Everybody, welcome to the Creation Ship. In today's video, I'm going to be using my INKTENSE blocks to create this stunning layered background. Before we get going, if you're not a subscriber, please hit the subscribe button and click on the bell. So I'm working on my 7x10 Canson Mixed Media art journal page. I've taken it off the coils so I can work flat. I have not gessoed it, so I am going to break the page by doing some of this stamping. I just looked through my stamps, wasn't sure which way to go, so you know what, you just need to start. I wanted some grunge in the background, some marks. I'm unsure of exactly where I'm going to go with this, and when in doubt, just start. Then I've added some more stamping, and this is from a Tim Holtz stamp set, and it has some words on it, and I want that to show through in the background. None of this is intended to be upfront and really strong, more faded, giving hints of it. I know I'm going to be covering this with color. I know I'm going to be covering it with my focal images, but I want something of interest peeking through. And as you've seen, I'm going to go with basically a two-toned background, and I love how it looks in both of those colors. I want to add some texture, but not too much, so I'm using thick gesso, and I'm putting through this Link Tiles stencil. So putting this gesso on this at this stage is going to knock back some of the stamping that I've done. And it's going to add some wonderful texture that I can play up when I colorize it. I'm not using modeling paste. That adds more texture than what I want to add on this. And I'm putting it in 3 places, which again, when we work in threes or odds, it just is more pleasing to the eye. And I've made a bit of a triangle with the 3 areas that I've stenciled the gesso on. And you can see the little bit of texture, but you're going to see the pattern as well. Well, we're not going to waste any leftover paint, so I grabbed my mini art journal and the same stencil, grabbed a makeup sponge, and I'm just adding some marks to this page. This is going to be sitting there, and at some point I will finish this. I'll link the video where I do pages in this mini DIY art journal. There, all ready to go for the next step. Now I'm giving this a coat of clear gesso. One, I realized I didn't gesso the page, so it's just raw paper, and I wanted to not be working on raw paper, but I'm using clear gesso, not regular gesso here, because I don't want to cover up all the stamping that I did. This napkin comes from NINNYSNAPKINS. It's called Christmas Robins, which I find rather perplexing. It has that holly. To me, robins are a sign of spring, and so I am going to edit the napkin. Right now, I'm looking at the colors in the napkin and picking colors that I think are going to go good in the background. So I'm picking kind of the orange that is orange-red that's on the robins, some yellow, as well as some blue. And I'm using the INKTENSE blocks because they're more translucent than acrylic paint, but you could do this with acrylic paint. I'm just scribbling it on, spraying it with water, and activating it. Now, INKTENSE blocks are ink that are activated by water. Once they're fully activated and completely dry, they are permanent. And you can see how translucent they are. Now, often I will put one coat on and then add more. The colors dry a little bit less bright than when they're wet. So you have to be mindful of that. And I'm going to be playing with the color. I'm going to bring some of that yellow into the blue, some of the blue into the yellow, some of the orange into the blue. And it's just going to tie everything together. But basically I'm keeping the top one color and the bottom another. And I really like how this turned out in the end, because the stamping is the same top and bottom, but it looks so very, very different when you do the different colors. So I play a lot, add a little bit more, take a little bit off. If you put on a color and you don't like it, you can wipe it off with a baby wipe before it dries, just like acrylic paint. And that's another reason why I put that gesso on, the clear gesso, because I didn't want it to soak in the paper. If it's soaked in the paper, you can't really get it off. So you want a non-porous surface, and that's what the gesso does. So I'm adding a little bit more, a little bit less, and I continue doing that as this page evolves. If there's excess pigment, it's settling in the thick gesso that I put through the stencil. I'm happy with it for now. I do more tweaking. So I am peeling off the excess plies of this Christmas Robins napkin. And I'm just going to water cut the elements or parts of this that I do not want. So I don't want the holly. I am going to turn this into a springtime thing. I'm going to do some apple blossoms or cherry blossoms. At this point, I wasn't sure if I was going to keep this branch or make my own. So I keep my options open. I'm just putting a little bit of water on a liner brush, going a little bit of a ways, pulling it away. This gives a deckled edge, which makes it more seamless and it blends into your background. Now I've decided I'm going to add on a branch. So I'm just going to, right at the midpoint, use my INKTENSE blocks and sketch out a branch. I'm using sepia and then I use some black. I mix those colors right on the page. I want these robins to look. Now you could do the same thing with a Stabilo all pencil, but the Stabilo all pencil will not be permanent, but the INKTENSE will be. So you can draw with it, you can paint with it, you can do backgrounds with those INKTENSE blocks. They are a little pricey, admittedly, but considering how long they last and the flexibility of them, I do feel that they are a great investment. And I love that they're permanent. Here I'm just adding some black in there. Nothing too terribly precise. Now I've decided, since I've drawn my branch, I'm just going to cut off the branch that's on the napkin. So this is how you can build onto a focal image. Use parts of it. And I'm just making sure that the branch and all the INKTENSE block is fully activated, because when I glue down the robins and any other elements, I don't want to smudge. I don't want to reactivate it. And when you have what you like, dry it and then move on. Now I look through my napkins and I've got a couple napkins that have apple blossoms. That one's a little too small. This one, I love the scale of the apple blossom, so I am just going to cut those elements out. I'm not too fond of the birds on that or other elements of this napkin, but I'm going to harvest all the apple blossoms on here. So I'm just going to cut them all out of this napkin, peel off the excess layers, and I'm going to glue it onto a piece of copy paper. when I glue these on, I want that color to stay. I don't want the background color to come through the napkin. That's why I'm gluing it onto the copy paper. And I've done more than what I think I'm going to use on today's project. Any excess will go into my stash. I taught a time when I do this. I was just about to stop for lunch, so I got it all done and then I let it dry while I went and did lunch or while I go for my walk. So I'm not sitting there waiting. I realized if I glued the napkin down with the robins, the background is also going to show through, so I'm gluing those robins down onto copy paper as well. I could have edited out. I could have just put one of the robins on my page or two. I could have edited that out and made it more of my own. Playing a little bit with the placements once all my elements are cut out, and I'm going to glue this down with gel medium. And I've chosen gel medium now because one, there's texture from that thick gesso on the background, and two, these elements are a little thicker because there's napkin and copy paper. I'm being mindful that sometimes the INKTENSE blocks could start to reactivate if it's not fully dry or fully activated, but that wasn't the case. I wasn't getting any smearing or reactivation. I'm just editing it out a little bit more, making it fit my composition. I wanted to put all these elements in before I did any final tweaking in the background. I didn't like that text right above that one robin's head, so I'm giving it a wash of white gesso just to knock that back. I'm going to come back in and colorize that with the INKTENSE blocks. I just didn't like that was like front and center, and that's where my eye went. So you can always adjust. Here I'm just adding some more blue, deepening the bottom. And this is what I mean. It's a little bit of a dance, just adding color. But I needed all those elements, the robins, the apple blossoms on the page before I could decide what I wanted. I realized that underneath the robins it may be shaded and darker. Just adding a little bit of that blue into the top. I don't want it to look like, you know, the top is one color and the bottom is another color and then there's just a line dividing it. I want it to meld together. I was going to make the apple blossoms a little more pink, but when I started that, I realized that it was making the apple blossoms disappear with the orange color at the top. So then I just grabbed some white gesso, and it has a little bit of pink tinge in it, and I'm just gessoing over the apple blossoms from that napkin, and that's really making the apple blossoms pop and stand out. There's still that little bit of pink around the edge, but the white really makes it stand out. And I'm just using a little round brush to do this. I'm not being overly precise. And it's adding a little bit more texture to the apple blossoms. I've got some black paint on my angle brush, and I'm just going to edge my page. I'm darkening some of the black on the robins, framing it with black here as I'm edging, ties in all the black that's on the page. And because the INKTENSE blocks is completely dry, and it is not, when I'm adding this wet on, it is not smearing at all, rubbing off. I looked through my Winged Wonders sentiment pack, and you can check that out at NINNYSNAPKINS.com. I'll put a link in the description box. And there are lots of sayings that go well with this. So it's a matter of the font and the size to fit where I want. All along I was thinking I was going to put it above the robin's head, and at last minute I decided it's going to go down here. It kind of grounds the page, and it really allows the orange and yellow at the top to really shine. Then I get an idea to use my Lindy Starburst spray. It's on my use it or lose it list. And I thought, oh, if I do some drippage in and amongst the texture or the thick gesso, it might show up and you get some of that shimmer, because the Starburst sprays have some metallic in it as well as the color. And while it deepens the color a little bit here, I didn't really get a whole lot of bang for my buck. And not a lot of the shimmer shine through. So I'll try again with the Starbursts on another day. But if you don't use it, you're not going to learn how to use it. So I like the deepening of the color, so that was a win. The shimmer overall, not so much. I could have just used a darker INKTENSE block and get the same effect. I take the blue from the INKTENSE block and a little bit of that orange, and I paint over the sentiment. I didn't want it to be white. I didn't want that to be so front and center. I wanted it faded. And I splattered with some gold. I wanted some shimmer on that page, so I was determined to get it one way or another. And there is the finished page. Thank you so much for joining me. Please join my Facebook group. Until next time, go get creative.